is to a culture of collaboration, of sharing, where one team works with another and celebrates the success of each other, where coming up with ideas for the other is rewarded and not discouraged. You don't create these little empires and so forth. So some of those are hints that help cultivate self-belief, and but there isn't a general methodology for getting there, in my view.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Sikka. That's been excellent. I'm sure all of us here appreciate it. The chapter... Yeah, the chapter will be delighted to host you personally on the next possible occasion, whenever that is, and possibly even see a lot of the doodling in person, when you are here personally. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Heading off to the final and the main panel discussion tonight on the theme of the future of innovation and surrounding the startup ecosystem. May I request the panelists to come on stage? To introduce the panelists we have here today, our moderator is Ruth David. Ruth has been a reporter at Bloomberg since February 2010, where she tracks the M&A and IPO activities in the EMEA region. Prior to Bloomberg, she worked with Asia Money magazine as a correspondent for South Asia. She's also worked with Forbes from 2005 to 2007. Our next panelist is Mohit Joshi. He is the Executive Vice President at Infosys and the Head of Financial Services Practice. He holds additional responsibility for operations in Brazil and Mexico. In his previous role at Infosys, he was responsible for leading the financial services practice in Europe. In 2007, Mohit was appointed as CEO of Infosys Mexico and was instrumental in setting up the first subsidiary in Latin America. Mohit has previously worked in India with ABN AMRO and ANZ Grindlays in the corporate investment banks. Our next panelist is Saul Klein. Saul is a partner at Index Ventures. Since joining in 2007, Saul has invested in early-stage internet companies including AlertMe, Chartbeat, Glasses Direct, Soluto, MyHeritage, and Songkick. In 2007, Saul founded SeedCamp to help European entrepreneurs successfully build technology businesses. Saul is also a founding partner of the Accelerator Group, which he started with Robin Klein in 1999 as a vehicle for investing in early-stage internet services, e-commerce, and digital media businesses. We next have Manish Madhwani from GP Bullhound. Manish is co-founder and managing partner of GP Bullhound and has executed M&A and capital-raising transactions since 1997, involving some of the best-known global internet, software, and media companies, including Spotify, King.com, WPP, Accenture, News Corp, and Experian. Manish was also selected as one of the top 40 deal makers globally by M&A Advisor, and he started his career at Barclays Capital's private equity team. Manish is currently chairman of the Investor All-Stars and Media Momentum judging panels, and is a regular speaker and panelist at various conferences. Our final panelist is Srikanth Velimakanni. Many of you have already met him earlier today. He was at the Big Data panel. A fellow alumnus and PGP 1998, Srikanth co-founded Fractal Analytics, a company specializing in predictive analytics and decision sciences, in Feb 2000, and has been the CEO since 2006. Prior to this, he has consulted major market leaders in predictive analytics for risk management and marketing effectiveness. After campus, Srikanth has worked with ANZ Investment Bank and ICICI. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you. I'm an Ahmedabad alumni. I just want to say it's great to be here in a room with some of the country's best brains. And I've heard a lot about all the miracles and wonders that you all did on campus. including some former alumni tell me turning water into wine, which in a dry state is quite a miracle, so congratulations. And because this is all about innovation, I decided to reach out to one of your well-known alumni innovators on Twitter. I'm sure some of you must have heard of him, Chetan Bhagat, but I was told he's really busy working on patenting his latest innovation, Half Girlfriend, before Bollywood steals that idea. So I'm sorry I couldn't get anything from him. And I also tried better known alumni Raghu Rajan at the RBI, but something told me that the Twitter account at RBI Gov, which said his occupation is being Shobha De's crush, might not be the right one. So since we're talking about innovation and social media, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask the panelists was, do you think social media plays any roles in reaching the startup companies, maybe to the investors, or to some of these corporate VCs that we've been talking about? Are you seeing any effect of that? And I'll leave it open to anyone in the panel who wants to take that.
I guess we saw social media with King.com. So people will have seen King.com as one of Europe's best gaming companies and one of the biggest exits, close to $6 billion. And we started working with them a very long time ago, when they were before kind of the Facebook transformation of the gaming industry. And they weren't acquiring their users via Facebook, and they were kind of blown away by all of the new companies that suddenly started outstripping them, Zynga and quite a few of the US-based companies. And they, to their credit, they were brave enough. I think they were generating around $60 million at the time. And they effectively shut off that stream. So I think as Vishal was saying, to have the courage to take the risks and innovate outside of the core business is critical for all of these companies. And they basically wrote the main revenues off and dedicated all of their, a lot of their star talent towards social media and gaming. And they then went on this amazing trajectory, which culminated in this $6 billion exit. So I think it's critical. You got to really tap into every form of social media now.
And one of the things that Vishal was also talking about was of the arrogance of some of these startups. I'm wondering, and maybe Saul, you can answer that. In terms of valuations, what are you really seeing around that, especially some of these companies which are in the innovative space?
Yeah, the word also struck me, and there are definitely arrogant startups. Sometimes arrogance is about confidence. Sometimes arrogance, steps over the line from confidence. But I think, and we saw today a company that started not more than around 2 or 3 years ago in London, Deliveroo, yes, raise $100 million. It's actually the third round it's raised this year. At Index, we were lucky enough to invest in the Series A, as we did with King. And I think, you're seeing companies that are able to grow at extraordinary and unprecedented rates across sectors now. I mean, Uber's done it in transportation, Airbnb's done it in hospitality, Snapchat is doing it in social media, WhatsApp did it in messaging and communications, Skype, which we were also part of, also did it in communication. So I do think, there are some of these companies that are being born and now being born at a much, much more regular rate that are becoming very big, very fast, and not just in terms of audience, but in terms of revenue as well. And sometimes those companies may come across as arrogant, although, I think probably no more or less arrogant than big companies who, look at these companies sometimes and say, excuse my French, but who the hell do these guys think we are? I mean, I remember at Skype, for example, going to an event where the then CEO of Vodafone was talking, an Indian CEO. This was a time before the iPhone, and maybe it was a very credible statement to say, well, no one's ever going to make free phone calls on a mobile phone. Skype's something we can forget about. And I think, there is a danger in any kind of myopia. It could be startup myopia, it could be corporate myopia. But I think we can all be guilty of arrogance.
And Mohit, from the view of a global big company, how do you ensure that you're not, one, and I know Vishal spoke to this about driving innovation, so any thoughts on that, but also how do you ensure that you're not missing out on the next big idea in your space?
So I think it's a couple of things, right? One is what Vishal spoke about is tapping all the talent that we have, the 150,000 plus people to make sure that they can contribute. But equally, we have launched our own corporate venture fund of $500 million. So we're also actively reaching out to the startup community, trying to embrace their ideas, trying to get them to our clients, right? Because in the B2B space at least, the fact that we have access to most of the large banks, so most of the large manufacturing companies in the world is a very valuable asset that we have. So we are trying to do both, right? We are trying to bootstrap ourselves to make sure that we can tap into all the creativity within the firm. But equally, we are investing fairly heavily through acquisitions, through Series A investments with the startups as well, because they have some very credible ideas, right? They have energy, they have ideas, and we can be the channel for them to reach out to some large companies that otherwise might not want to engage directly with a startup.
And is there any particular stage? Do they get to the mythical animal or to the unicorn stage by the time they come to you, or do they come to you earlier?
I think we're fairly clear that, at least, most of our investment will be in the B2B space, right? Because we work with, with most of the large corporations in the world. And so, the technology that is, important or useful to these large banks, for instance, or the large asset managers. I think the second thing we're fairly clear about is that where we're making investments, these are very early stage investments, right? So mostly it'll be, and we've made 3 or 4 already this year. And with one exception, they've all been Series A investments. So we want to get in when early. And secondly, there is no shortage of money in this market, right? These companies could raise money from pretty much anybody. The thing is, what we can give them is, some level of maybe mentorship or a very large technical pool that we have in case they need to ramp up. And the second thing is, which is the most important, is access to, a significant number of corporate clients. If you're approaching the B2C market, then there's a different route that you're following where social media is very relevant. If you're looking at the B2B market, it has historically been harder to break into, right? Large companies are harder to break into, and what we provide is a very useful channel. So for instance, we can set up a sandbox and they can do proof of concepts over here that we can then take to our large banking customers who might not want to engage directly with an unproven startup, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And Srikanth, one of the things you were mentioning, that you have a company within yours that you've kind of hived out, right? Would you be able to talk a bit about innovation there and how you foster it?
Sure. So one thing I want to connect back with what Vishal was saying was that we created a team called Fractal Sciences, which was doing some of the breakthrough innovation stuff. And it was extraordinarily successful in the sense that we created some really three compelling products out of that in a span of 2 years. But earlier this year, or actually maybe it was a year ago, we actually broke it up. We said, no, we don't want this anymore, because what we realized was that everybody in the organization, 1,000 people organization, everybody else is thinking that, okay, these 20 people are going to do all the innovation, like Vishal rightly mentioned. So even though it was working beautifully, we said, break it up. It's everybody's job to do innovation and interesting innovation. But at the same time, what we did was we also created a product. We incubated a product, and we said, you guys go and build, something world-changing. And to enable you to do that, we will make sure that we don't talk to you at all. We just isolated them from rest of the stuff. In fact, one of our exec team members, he took charge of this. And as part of this, he said that I'm going to stop attending all the exec meetings from now onwards. So he stopped attending all the meetings. They went out of context, like Vishal was saying. And now we're just about to launch that product. As of this week, we're actually launching that product. It's codenamed Wink, which is what you need to know. It's essentially the Google Now for the enterprise, but very, very interesting as to how this was created by completely isolating them from Fractal, they wouldn't have been able to think that big and create that kind of product. So we've seen some of that in action.
Okay, but when it comes to disruptive innovation, which might shake up client business models, and I think Vodafone Skype is a great example there. But what do you do to ensure that you're also fostering that? Is there a need, you think, for maybe Chinese walls? You talked about the fund that Infosys has, which has about 500 million. How do you ensure that you're also fostering disruptive?
I think the thing is that existing businesses are extremely concerned about what might happen to their revenue streams, right? So, if you look at banks, for instance, most banks are completely sort of paranoid about what a blockchain, for instance, might do to their businesses. So they're very keen themselves to figure out how do they build these, these moats, but also increasingly, how do they invest in these, both from a technology perspective to make these technologies much more usable, but also from a use case perspective. So it is not a case that large businesses are sitting comfortably and not worried about their revenue streams. In fact, if anything, I think they're probably more paranoid than they should be about the long-term disruption to their business. I cover financial services, and this is a business which has seen what Amazon has done to retailing, for instance, or what Airbnb has done to the hotel business. And there is a lot of concern that you might not have one Uber of banking, but you could have an Uber of payments, an Uber of foreign exchange, an Uber of corporate lending, an Uber of working capital management. So there is concern, and therefore we're working with many of these companies to figure out how can blockchain, for instance, work in their setup. How do they make their front to back systems much more digital and much more straight through. The problem obviously is that when you have legacy, then legacy carries its own cost, and you can't change everything overnight. Sometimes it is much faster to if you're starting from scratch, it is much faster. But to come back to your question, there is a huge amount of interest. There is a great deal of paranoia. And there is the opportunity for for us to work with these companies so that they can radically re-engineer their businesses.
If I may add a little bit here, we've seen some of this disruption and how companies are responding to that, and working with one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, which sees this big threat from this company called Dollar Shave Club. I don't know, some of you might have heard of this. This is one of the unicorns in this space. They do subscription-based razor and blade service. It's a unicorn. It's doing very well. But our goal here was to help this consumer goods company, which controls basically the entire shaving market in the world, to understand what kind of people actually buy these kinds of razors and blades, and how can they tackle this disruption. So using data, especially we were able to use some payment cards data. We were able to see that this is the type of person who ends up buying them. This is what he buys, other things that he buys. And therefore, if you were to tackle this disruption, what you need to do. So there's certainly some of that analytics, and what we discussed is also being to play. But the larger point being that I think companies are taking these kinds of attacks very seriously as we speak. And the biggest companies in the world are doing all kinds of things, right? From this kind of stuff, and I've seen other places where there's a company that sued a 10 people startup, a $50 billion company suing a 10 people startup because they feel like they may disrupt the toothpaste market because of their innovative design. So they've come up with, so there are all kinds of tricks, but people are definitely, big companies are seeing the disruption.
I think the key is trying to work out how you make the two cultures work. So we've probably seen 200 M&A transactions, and in the old days, you would see a lot of companies, a lot of these startups with new ideas get consumed into a large corporate and then killed off. They try and make it part of that company. Yeah. And I think Saul's point was saying the speed that these companies are scaling at is at a totally different level even than 5 years ago. So when we look at this kind of unicorns is a bad phrase, but these companies of scale, I think, is a better phrase. The companies that are hitting that billion-dollar valuation level, it used to take 9 years on average for them to get there. They're now doing, the latest cohort is now doing it in 3 to 4 years, because the route to market is so much quicker, they're much more experienced, there's more capital, so it's creating these huge shifts. The smart companies that we're seeing, the smart global enterprises, know that when they're doing these acquisitions or they're doing the partnerships, you can't force that into your culture. You've got to keep it totally separate.